Okay, well, welcome everyone to today's webinar titled The Impact of Effective Expense Management. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we're pleased you could join us as we consider the costs and challenges of inadequate expense management, as well as proven strategies for implementing streamlined processes. Our speakers for today are Danny Martucci, General Manager of Commercial Card and Expense at Corpay, Rakesh Fifadra, Director of Product Management at Corpay, and Craig Jeffery, Founder and Managing Partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Danny, Rakesh, and Craig, and I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you so much, Brian, and it's good to have everybody join in the morning or the afternoon, wherever you're from. Thanks for taking some time out of your day. Danny and Rakesh, I think this is our first webinar together. I'm delighted to be able to share the floor with both of you.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Craig.
Well, let's get started. What are we going to cover today? Brian already gave a readout of the overall content from a descriptor standpoint. Here's our agenda. So what will we be talking about? So making purchases, the reality of business. What are we talking about there? This is the necessity of everything related to making payments and being expense minded. So there's a variety of options of handling the payables process and doing it in an effective, efficient manner. And that involves more than just the payment process or more than just the approval process. It's looking at things comprehensively. As we move over to expense management, what are the responsibilities and the ideals? So expense management has everything from budgeting, approval of expenses, the payment process, and nobody is an island unto themselves. There are connections to efficiency, which impacts an organization's ability to scale. There's the overall cost. There are implications for liquidity and capital, which is near and dear to the treasury people on the call's heart. So it touches many areas of an organization. Then we'll look at inefficiency and effectiveness. What are the consequences? This is that topic, that ripple effect of efficiency, capital impact. Inefficiency creates, or manual processes in particular, create inefficiencies or defects. Those create challenges in the process. Efficiency, automation, straight-through processing improves communication throughout the process and the use of capital. Then we'll look at strategies and points to consider. So we'll look at automation, end-to-end processing. In particular, looking at the user experience, both partners, and how you can go about assessing automation solutions. So we'll look at the comprehensiveness of the solution, the financial strength of the partner, the user experience that you get in working with particular vendors. And then the key takeaways, Danny and Rakesh will cover four key topics that'll summarize elements related to effectiveness, efficiency, how you evaluate companies, and then the concept of future-proofing. I think we've heard that for a number of years, but this idea of how do you create a scalable environment. So a number of good elements to cover. That's your agenda for today, and we'll get Danny involved right from the start. So Danny, maybe you could give us an overview on what's the scope that we're talking about here on expense management. I'll turn it over to you, and again, welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, Craig, and hello to everyone out there. So really nice to be with you. But yeah, this is at Corpay, this is how we think about kind of expense management. It's kind of the framework we apply to when we're advising clients on how to effectively and efficiently manage their expenses. And it really starts with the expense types. So no surprise for most of the folks on this call, but hey, the big categories that need to be managed are really direct expenses, which are those that would typically hit the COGS line item on the P&L, but those are more direct in providing a good or service to your customers. So tools, materials, supplies, and then on the indirect side, Labor is one that could kind of cross both categories, but typically, especially for product-based business, more on the indirect side, sales, administrative type of things, right? IT or facilities, right? Those that are not directly involved in the production of the end product. So both of these are really key categories for expense management. And then the other kind of lens we like to look at it through is kind of the process in which things are bought. So for any of these expense types, those could be purchased in a more centralized way or decentralized way. And so what do we mean by centralized? Well, that's typically spend that would be invoiced. It would come through an AP department. There would be typically a more limited set of core suppliers, and there'd be folks within the business that are centrally managing that vendor relationship or that invoice type of spend. And there might be processes around that, approval processes, workflows to make sure that spend is approved and gets booked in the right way, that we have budgets to support it, so on and so forth. And then the decentralized space is often a little bit trickier, right? Because the decision making is also decentralized. And so some categories that fall on and typically fall in the decentralized scope would be things like fuel. So if you have drivers that are moving goods, they need to fuel up on the road, right? Travel, where you might have more white collar type of employees that are making decisions on what hotel to stay at and what airline to fly and what restaurant to eat at, right? And then subscriptions, or especially in the software world we live in now, there's more and more functions of the business are subscribing to software or different publications to be able to do their job. And this is really, for just speaking for Corpay, we play across both of those spaces. So in the decentralized space, it's more we have card products and software that allows decentralized employees to submit their expenses for approval, capture receipts, get booked in the right place on the GL. And then same on the centralized space, we have AP automation solutions that make that a more efficient process, and more more efficient and more effective. And then can also add some controls and fraud prevention into the process to help from that perspective also. So anyways, that's kind of the main framework we use, and we want to just start the presentation with that. And then on the next page, we wanted to just point out, like, hey, each of these areas, payments is really critical to it's really the lifeblood of how a business runs, right? Without payments both coming into your business and going out of your business, things wouldn't operate, right? And so this is kind of what we call the Jekyll and Hyde, if you will, of payments, where on one hand they're super strategic, right? For what I just mentioned, we can't operate without making payments and receiving payments. But on the other hand, they can be painful, right? It's administrative. It's not really core to serving a customer or retaining an employee or growing revenue, right? It's kind of just it's got to be there kind of thing. So that's the kind of dichotomy here. And so we want to just point that out, that hey, it's something like strategic and like necessary to get right, but we also know it can be painful, right? There's all kinds of defects and errors, and fraud is becoming more and more of a problem. And so we, as a treasury function, you've got to try to manage those kind of competing realities of payments in your world. So yeah,
excellent. Yeah, thanks for that. And I know some people are having problems with the the viewing, how much is zoomed in or zoomed out. If you still have issues, please type in the chat box. If you use the regular zoom adjustment feature or control minus or control plus, that will increase or decrease the size of what's showing. Other than that, logging out, logging back in might resolve whatever anomalies happening. But yeah, thanks so much, Danny. And then, we shift over to managing payments with what Danny's built on, and we'll bring Rakesh in to discuss these different responsibilities that usually touch on multiple areas from funding to payment execution. So thanks for joining us, Rakesh.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So yeah, just as Danny mentioned about like different types of expenses or purchases, right? We also feel like it's very crucial, like to manage payments for a healthy financials, right? For any organization. So if there's effective communication and planning between the treasury department and also the AP department, it helps in making sure there are enough funds, right, available to pay vendors as well as suppliers. So when we talk about funding, right, basically treasury responsibility is to make sure they correctly forecast organization's cash flow and make sure there's enough liquidity, right, to cover all the payment obligation. And when we look at on the AP side, right, like they basically define all the processes, right, around how an invoice is coming in, what are the approval workflows, how to maintain data integrity as well as all the documentation. So when we talk about invoice, right, like basically making sure that invoice is received properly, like make sure it matches to the PO, as well as validate all the goods and services which are received. And once that is done, basically initiate the approval workflow. So basically route the invoice, right, to the relevant department or individual based upon like predefined authorization levels as well as budgetary constraints. And it also helps in making sure that amounts, right, within invoices are aligning, right, with what the approved budget was. So make sure the expenditures they remain within the allocated limits. Like I feel it is also very important to maintain data integrity. So make sure all the vendor information, right, is correct, that all the payment terms are correct, as well as all the invoice details are maintained properly in order to avoid any kind of errors or delays throughout the payment process. And finally, when it comes to execution, right, it's basically making sure what are the payment methods, like what are the different payment methods available, as well as eventually initiating the payment, right? So this is basically collaboration, right, between treasury and AP department to make sure they have the right payment methods, be it a check, ACH, like a commercial card, or even like e-payables solutions such as like a virtual card. And then based upon the payment terms and whatever has been negotiated with the vendors, in basically initiating the payment and making sure all the data and everything gets reconciled accordingly in all the internal system. So so in a nutshell, right, between treasury and AP, I feel like they go hand in hand in making sure like all the funding, all the processes, all the executions of payments is like it's like done like in a right manner. So yeah.
Well, excellent. Yeah, thanks, Rakesh. And that brings us to our first poll question. This is a single choice poll question, gauging where people are today. So our expense management process is highly automated, mostly automated, some heavy manual aspect to it. It's mostly manual, or I am unsure. So go ahead and select one of those and submit it. And that will be a good way to put that in there. After you've completed that, I'll point your attention over to the chat. Follow Corpay on LinkedIn. If you haven't followed CTM File on LinkedIn, please go do that today. That's a media site that we have. And then, of course, you can follow Strategic Treasure. So those three, that would be awesome if you click and follow those on LinkedIn after you've submitted your poll response. Now, I will say before, as people continue to take the poll, before we share what that is, and I will ask I will ask our panelists, Danny and Rakesh, to comment on any of the responses. But if in the chat box, if you type the word Corpay or pull, but let's say Corpay, and we get, let's just say 125 Corpay or polls in there, we'll send out the results of all the poll questions to the audience. So Corpay, poll work, and or Hannah, if you want to type in HANNA, that would work as well. And you don't get extra credit if you type 2 words compounded in there. So, but thank you. All right, and this is good because Brian has to count all those up. All right. So I'm not sure who would like to comment first, but we can clearly see mostly automated is the most common. It's 43%. Heavy manual aspect or mostly manual is 27% with another 10% not knowing. So I think this is this indicates quite a bit of room for solutions like Corpay. But what are you seeing here? Is this reflective of the general market or anything else that we'd like to see?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Craig. I mean, I think yeah, this would be generally what we see in the market. Maybe even a little bit more advanced, I'd say, than the market. So kudos to the folks here for really being ahead of the curve. But yeah, something like probably we'd see like half the market is probably using some kind of solution in this space. Here I would say like, maybe 60 or 70% of the attendees. And I think it's helpful to think of it for kind of automation and like going back to kind of what we were saying about centralized versus decentralized, where for employees or folks in the field and whatnot, I'm curious how many of you all were thinking about it from that perspective, where, say, hey, to capture receipts and approve expense reports and manage reimbursement, that you were thinking about it from that aspect versus the more centralized side of it of booking things to the GL and coding effectively and making sure that things are closed out to close the monthly books, those types of things. So we see that there is still, I think, more on the latter side, a little bit more of a gap even, but anyways, yeah, this is generally, I think, a little bit ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and if I can also add a comment right now. I feel when we look at different company sizes or verticals, like we see a lot more automation on the larger market or larger organizations versus like small mid-sized organizations. And that's why we are saying now there's a growing trend where even smaller or mid-sized organizations are looking to automate like a whole bunch of internal manual processes. Because if we because most of the expense management, right, or accounts payable, they technically fall under the B2B category, right? And when we look on the consumer side, where we have our personal credit cards, like there's so much innovation with regards to mobile capabilities, omni-channel experience, like everything being real time. I feel like all our admins or all the like everybody working within AP, treasury, everybody's expecting like a similar experience on the B2B side as well, where they want to make sure everything is more mobile, more real time, more omni-channel. So that's where we are seeing that there's a lot more demand with regards to automation, and like there are companies looking for like solutions which can digitalize like a whole bunch of internal manual processes.
Well, yeah, thanks, Rakesh, and we'll close the survey out and thank everybody for responding. We have more polls coming up, and Rakesh, you're back on the goals of expense management. How should we think about, or how do companies think about the goals they have and their objectives around expense management?
Yes, when we basically talk about goals, right? Those are basically like objectives or targets which are set by organizations to effectively control, monitor, and optimize their spending, right, and their financial resources. So these goals are basically designed to ensure that whatever organizations are spending, right, that it aligns with their strategic priorities, their operational needs, as well as internal financial constraints, right? So the first one is definitely like scalable growth, right? How can we grow while also managing expenses? So I feel if expenses align with the growth ambitions, and that this can definitely be achieved. And as long as expenses are structured as well as there are right tools in place, they can definitely help an organization grow while also maintaining or controlling any expenses or spend. When we look at optimizing liquidity, right, or working capital, like I feel this is a given, right? If it's a healthy, if there's a healthy liquidity and working capital, it's like good for any business, right? So if an organization, let's say, is using like various B2B solutions such as commercial cards or e-payables, right? Be it either for employee T&E or even for vendor payments, it can definitely help improve their working capital with regards to the billing terms, the payment terms, the rebates, which are offered by various financial institutions. Like efficient payment process. So if there's a streamlined payment process, it can basically benefit everyone involved, right? Be it a purchaser or vendor. So by embracing payment methods like such as, let's say, virtual card, or even by centralizing payment functions, I feel organizations can like enhance transparencies, they can reduce error, as well as they can expedite and make the entire payment process more efficient. When we look at like strong relationship management, right? So I feel this is not only on the vendor or supplier side, but also internally with your employees. So if there's a good expense management process, I feel it can help build like good trust, right, and collaboration with your vendor, as well as it can improve internal like employee satisfaction, right? If there's like a streamlined, simple expense management process where they don't have to submit any kind of paperwork and they can do everything online and like in a very simple steps. Comprehensive security and control, right? So again, I feel this in today's day and age, this is like a non-negotiable requirement, right? It is a must. So if there are spend management platforms or expense management platforms, such as the one like which we have at Corpay, it comes with a lot of built-in like security and controls, not only around like pre-authorization, but also post-authorization. So when I say pre-authorization, the controls could be around making sure there are right limits in place, making sure there are like different velocity controls, such as how much an employee can spend on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, as well as like merchant controls, saying you can only use this card at a specific merchant location. And then the post-authorization would be more around expense reports and like making sure there are right receipts, make sure all the expenses are coded properly, and whatnot. And lastly, cost effective process. So again, if we look at right, what are the current processes involved, and identify any kind of improvements, like move from more manual to automated process, it can bring in a lot of cost saving opportunities and make the entire expense management process more cost effective.
So there's a lot on this slide, a lot of really good comments, and this is really a touches on that comprehensive approach that you've been hearing about the whole webinar. So thanks for covering that. And a lot of people are saying, when is the next poll question? And we've got one right here for you. This is a multiple choice. You can select 1, 2, 3, or 4. If you don't use any of them, we didn't give you an option for that. So we'll see how that goes. So which payment methods do you use for expense management? Making payments: T&E card, virtual card, a ghost card, and multi-card or one card. So V card stands for virtual card in this particular instance. So those are the 4. You can go ahead and select those. For those who are haven't responded in the chat, either Corpay, Poll, or Hannah, you can still do that if you haven't done that. We need 30 more to see it. I saw that Hannah typed in Hannah, so that's awesome. So we'll see how that goes. And then on this one, we'll look maybe when those things come in. Rakesh, I don't know if you want to start first. Danny can finish it up because Danny will also go into the next slide after that, if that works for the two of you. All right. So virtual cards, pretty good. Ghost cards, pretty limited. Any thoughts on either of these numbers or how people are thinking about the payment methods that they use for expense management?
Yeah, I feel for most part, this does align with our thinking as well. Because when we think about expense management, right, for most part, it is an employee, like T&E or what Danny was calling the decentralized, right, expenses. And T&E perfectly fits into that picture. So having an employee like who travels frequently have a card assigned to them, so that all the spend can be captured within one card, and it can be properly expensed and allocated. So V card would come, depends how we define virtual cards, because there can be like a single use virtual card, or there can also be a multi-use virtual card. So scenarios where we see V card being used on a single purchase would be, let's say you have somebody coming for an interview, or there's a contractor who's not like full-time employee. You can issue them like a digital virtual card, and they can use it for like one or two expenses. And Ghost card is more like a centralized card, right, where it is lodged with a TMC or like a travel management company, or even with the vendor, and they can incur recurring purchases on a Ghost card, and all the spend can be centralized within one card. So there are not a lot of whole bunch of cards that can be that needs to be managed. So yeah.
Okay. Danny, any additional comments about like which ones of these are growing most rapidly in the market generally?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Rakesh that hey, the T&E card is really the best practice here, especially for decentralized expenses. Craig, on your question, it'd really be the virtual card is probably growing the fastest, right? This is where really technology is kind of changing the game there, where as Rakesh mentioned, there's the kind of typical use case of, let's say, Craig, you have to travel for a job interview or for to visit a client, and that company could provide just a one-time use card to book your flight, for example, would be a typical virtual card use case. And then also in the AP space, virtual card is growing quite quickly as a way to pay vendors, and typically a faster way with better data and less fraud risk than say a paper check or an ACH. So that's really the primary growth area. And admittedly, we're as Corpay, we're the #1 MasterCard B2B issuer in the space, and so we're very card focused. But probably we to be comprehensive, we could have included check and bank transfer and wires as other ways that are still predominant in the market. But this, hey, that 75% of you are using a T&E card is really, I think, again, leading edge and the best practice. So
excellent. Thanks for the comments. And
Corpay card.
right.
And by way of notice, the poll questions, we have enough response in the chat box, so no need to type any more in. That's awesome. Thank you for paying attention. And then back to you, Dan, about inefficient expense process. So here's a model of an inefficient expense process. I'd love to hear your comments.
Yeah. This is just kind of like making the potential inefficiency come alive for you all, like which is nothing new, I'm sure, especially if your treasury department has responsibility for AP. You know the right side here pretty well, or just as a traveler, an employee, you get the left side. but we just wanted to paint a picture of just like the inefficiency that can be involved in this process. Did you see my request? Which request? Like, is it approved? How, it's just like the back and forth that can be created here, right? Did you attach a receipt? Oh, the policy is, anything under $50, you don't have to attach a receipt. Like, you attach the wrong, like all of that back and forth could be super painful, and solutions like ours can solve that. And then there's the whole, like, this little dialogue is just really the kind of expense approval part. There's the upstream aspects of this of, am I approved to travel or not? What is the policy? What, where can I stay? Those types of things. And then all the downstream stuff also of, all right, where does this get booked? Whose budget is it under? Does it get booked to this, this conference budget line item, or to general travel and expense? Like, you all know all the downstream aspects also of this. So it's really, I think, the best practice here is to have a solution that automates a lot of that, allows you to set the right policies and right controls, and then automates the approval process and the accounting process downstream. So,
Danny, as I look at this slide and heard you describe it, there's like death by a million touch points. And it's like, if you're ever in a text chat group and all of a sudden like 3 people are bored and they're like typing tons of stuff in there, it like almost renders you your phone useless, because there's just so many touch points, as opposed to let's have a conversation on a particular topic. And this inefficiency of back and forth, it's just we always have to think about that in every process, certainly in expense management, but in really every financial process area. How can we more effectively communicate, streamline the process, less touch points, more automation? And that, just kind of continuing there on the discussion, I'll let you continue the dialogue on ineffective processes.
Yeah. So on the previous page, we were talking about just the impact on folks' time, which is, super critical to running an efficient business, but there's other impacts also. Hey, you lose accurate visibility into, cash balances or payment timing, which can impact your liquidity and cash flow. Poor scheduling of CapEx, like, hey, for those big purchases that are, that may not be typically predictable on a monthly basis or whatnot, like those can be chunky things that can cause problems. Scheduling and communication. So, again, understanding where cash flows are going to hit on it from a timing perspective, and communicating effectively around those is challenging. And then just managing your payables and your DPO can get thrown out of whack, right? You can have big variances there, or just not really take use of your supplier financing effectively, right? By extending your DPO and using that as often a relatively cost efficient way to finance your operations. So all of these downstream impacts, like beyond just being a suck on folks' time within the organization, are super critical to solve. So.
Yeah, just double clicking into the poor scheduling of CapEx. That's it's an interesting scenario. The interplay, particularly there with treasury, cash flow and liquidity planning. You budget CapEx spending at a certain period of time in the year. It plugs into a month. There's an expectation there that shifts forward or it shifts backwards. 2 months or 3 or 4 months. Sometimes that communication doesn't exist very well. And from an accounting standpoint, it's like, okay, we're amortizing this, we're depreciating this over 60 months or 72 months, whatever the asset happens to be. And so the amount per month from an expense standpoint, from an accounting expense standpoint, isn't very great. But if you're acquiring a very significant piece of software equipment, that moving 2 or 3 months has a very much outsized impact on your liquidity, moving it up or down. Impact on expenses is smaller. The shift can create some havoc there. So while not necessarily tied into the effectiveness, ineffectiveness, that impact across the organization certainly matters. So each of these areas we realize or have to realize that this is a process that touches multiple areas. The impact is more broad than our own particular stovepipe or silo, depending on what part of the country you're from. There is a connection. There's an end-to-end result. So lots of consequences there to think about. Now, as Danny primarily laid out some of the inefficiencies and the problems, now we have to turn to Rakesh to how do we move from inefficient to or ineffective to effective.
Yeah, so like if we look here, like basically we have like few use cases or like few improvements around how like we can eliminate, right, ineffective tasks and make them more effective. So the first one, right, it's basically delayed expense approval. So this basically happens when they're not like automated processes, or when there are a lot of manual processes and a lot of back and forth with regards to the who the approval is, what are the requirements with regards to submitting expenses or whatnot. So in order to make this effective, right, it definitely helps if there are automated processes with regards to approvals where as a cardholder, I can just submit an expense report and it automatically goes to my approver who can review and quickly approve it. Or sometimes you can even built in automated approvals, right? Like let's say you can have some dollar limits saying any transaction less than $10 doesn't require approval or whatnot. So, second is slow or manual reimbursements. And in order to make this more, I would say, faster reimbursement, right, definitely through automation, but it also helps if this is built in within your expense management solution, where as a cardholder or an employee who's submitting a reimbursement request, you already have that payment information within the application, and once it is approved, you can automatically pay the employee, right? And there are also real-time payment options now available in the market where the employees get reimbursed instantly as soon as an expense reimbursement is approved. What we also see commonly is integration with ERP. So having an expense management solution that integrates with your current ERP software. So as you get any information, right, around reimbursement, it can plug into your ERP or into your HRIS systems, where you have all the employee payment and bank information in order to basically send all the reimbursements out. So it can help in like removing all the slow manual processes, like if you leverage such automated processes with the expense management providers. The next, like inefficient reporting, right, and definitely real-time reporting helps to make it more effective. As I was talking about, like all the innovations we are seeing on the consumer space, right, like even on the B2B side, there's a lot of real-time options now where you can get real-time or transaction authorization decline information. You can see what is the total spending, what is the outstanding balance, and it can help make like decisions. Like it can help with all the internal approvals, or making sure there's good transparency and clarity around where the spend is. So then too many surfaces to attack, and like in order to make it effective, like full visibility, right, of the payment process. So again, having solutions where you can do complete end-to-end, right, like on the AP side, if you have a tool where you can do from procure to pay, as well as on the T&E side where you can do your booking as well as approval, as well as expense management and reimbursement, it definitely helps in making those expense management processes more effective. Then if you have manual matching of expense and transaction, definitely this automated receipt to transaction matching. So what automated receipt to transaction is, there's OCR, right, or optical character recognition technology, which is in the market, where as soon as a receipt is uploaded or attached, the OCR can extract all the information from the receipt, like transaction amount, merchant information, what was the transaction date. And once the transaction is loaded or imported, right, it automatically matches based upon those parameters. Like it compares the transaction information versus the information from the receipt and automatically matches. So it removes the manual task of somebody attaching a receipt to a transaction when they're doing their expense management. Then keeping track of receipts. So again, this can be very cumbersome, right? Like if I am traveling as an employee, I'll have so many receipts, like for my breakfast, for my fuel, for my lunch, dinner, as well as any kind of digital receipts as well. Like if you're taking Uber, like, or if you have hotel receipts, right? So it helps to have a more digital solution where you can immediate capture a receipt and then forget about it, right? I buy a coffee, I take a picture, and the receipt is stored into my app. And then I don't have to worry about the receipt after that, right? Because the receipt is there in the app, it will automatically match to the transaction, and I can easily do my expense reports. And lastly, like the spending and lack of spending controls, then it can cause problems, right, with regards to visibility, with regards to reporting, as well as there is increased risk of fraud as well. So if they're spending amounts or controls built in, it definitely helps in making that process more effective with regards to controls on the card, as well as on the expense side by categorizing all the expenses accordingly. So it can help with the accounting process and the reconciliation process as well. Right.
Yeah, excellent. So that brings us, Rakesh, to our final poll question. And this is a multiple choice again. So you can see, you can select multiple options. So we look at payments and the payment process as a cost center, a profit center, an area ripe for fraud requiring improving security, a key component in our management of liquidity, just another finance area, other, and I am unsure. So I'd love to see what you think about that. Now, if you can't see the question, there'll be some notes in the chat box that shows ways it may be appearing on another screen, or if you have a screen off, it can sometimes sit behind that. Yeah, hopefully that'll work.
Maybe while we're waiting on that, I wanted to answer Benjamin's question about, he was asking about how virtual cards could, how you can track individual cards for an airline flight. And so, yeah, there's two main ways virtual cards are used in that space. So one is just, there might be a company virtual card that's in your travel portal, and all flights are booked on the same card effectively. I think that might be what Benjamin's referring to. The other way that allows for better tracking and approvals and accounting on the back end is the way our solution works, where every employee has a login to the software, and then upon request, they can be issued a virtual card that's linked to their kind of personal login. And then that card is a one-time use card typically, and can be used to book that flight, and then goes through the same expense report or approval process that any other expense would. So that's kind of our recommendation and best practice there for virtual card for travel.
Thanks for the answer, Danny. Thanks, Benjamin, for the question as well. Yeah, and I'm not sure which one want to handle it. We have a pretty dominant view of the payments and payment process as a cost center over a profit center. yeah, just any comments on these responses or implications of how we look at payment areas and payment process in particular.
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, it's, yeah, multiple of these things can be true, of course, as looks like many of you noted, where it's, certainly, I think just looking at the I'll come back to the cost center versus profit center thing, but on, hey, it's a key component in management of liquidity, absolutely, and an area ripe for fraud. We're definitely seeing that in the market, and so it's really important to have a partner that can help manage that, and also even insure against that in some ways. As far as a cost center versus profit center, I see most of you mentioned cost center, where certainly there's costs associated with running payments and staffing that function and whatnot. But what we're seeing with some of our clients, where they can really turn it into a profit center. How do they do that? Well, typically through rebates associated with card payments, right? Where say with our virtual card solutions for AP, or for other card solutions like T&E card, often that rebate can be so significant that it really covers the costs of that group and turns that group into a profit center. So that's something really you all should think about, and we're happy to help with on how do we change that paradigm and the thinking around a AP or treasury department with the use of card products. So.
Rakesh, any other comments?
Well, I'd say to Danny's point on the profit center, I feel it can also help, like depending upon the payment type you're using. If you're using card or like virtual payments, it can also help with the working capital. So let's say the invoice is due on 30 days, and with your card you have 30 days billing terms. You technically get 60 days, right, to repay or pay that invoice. So it can definitely help in improving the working capital there, and also with regards to any kind of supplier negotiations or discounts, right? Like if you're making early payments by using like cards or e-payables, it can definitely help in having some kind of a discount or negotiations, because it is helping supplier reduce their DSO, right? So yeah, definitely it would be good to see that number increase, where more and more people are looking at payments as also a profit center and not only cost center. So.
Excellent. Well done. Thanks everybody for responding to the poll questions. We always find it interesting. I know a lot of you do, because we went way over our 125 people typing Corpay poll or HANA. But how do you go about evaluating the solutions, and what are some of the key considerations? A couple of questions here are laid out for your, for your thought and evaluation. One of the biggest challenges in any type of tech implementation in finance is getting things up and running. So what type of support, what level of support is provided when you're onboarding, when you're being onboarded to a particular platform? This is particularly important because one of the areas where companies have the biggest roadblock is the amount of time, the level of capability of IT areas. They tend to be very, very jammed up, and that tends to be the biggest area that pushes off projects. Is if they're the heavier their involvement, the harder it is to get projects through and onboarded. So what type of support is offered to get things up and running? Second is, when you evaluate solutions, if inefficiency comes from defects, and defects generally come from either a poorly designed process or manual processes, right? Manual processes create a higher level of defects. It's hard to get above 3. It's really hard to achieve 3 sigma of limited errors in a manual process. That's almost impossible. And you can get to 5 sigma, quality with automated processes if they're designed right. So really, how will this system relieve the organizational manual tasks, since that's one of the key drivers for inefficiencies? And so that's everything from mouse clicks to handoffs, the level of complexity. How does it reduce that conversation, or as I talked about, the text chats that seem to get out of control? How are those conversations reduced? How are the handoffs between functions and operations managed? And then the other aspect is, does the situation that we have, will that scale and grow? Like, will we increase our volumes? If that's the case, how will the solution you acquire or buy reduce some of that complexity, make things less complex? And instead of, if you double, do you have to double your staff? That obviously wouldn't be very, very efficient. If you add 50%, you can handle it with your same staff level. That sounds extremely efficient, enabling you to scale. You don't want to be the gating item for growth is a cost center area, as people will think of it. But we're not going to be the area that creates a delay. And then with all of the new payment types and the focus on fraud and security against fraud, using new payment types that might be enriched with other information, new payment file formats that are necessary to support those, will this help the communication with your trading partners so that they don't create a defect by calling back and say, what are you paying for? Because we don't know what you sent this money for. We have a lot of, things that we're paying for. We need to know and have that information because we have a system, as do you. The payer and the payee both have to have a communication. That's the end-to-end view. And the other question is, when you evaluate solutions, does it support multiple payment types? Does it address a range of needs, or is it just highly, highly focused? And it's fine to use highly, highly focused systems if your need is pretty intensive in that particular area. But again, as we think about the end-to-end of the process, the end-to-end of the needs that exist, thinking about these together tends to be on the path towards the most, the greatest likelihood of success on this. So, as you think about the partners, these are crucial elements as you evaluate solutions. And that has brought us almost to the end of our hour, but there are some key final thoughts. And Rakesh, why don't you start us off? And Danny, if you'll finish us on the final thoughts.
Okay. Yes, as we look at this slide, I think it pretty much covers what we discussed today, right, throughout the session. So as we are thinking about expense management processes, or as we are evaluating or looking for new software providers are working with your financial institutions, and make sure that it is like a focused activity. Like, make sure you understand what the current processes are, where the gaps are, where do you need improvements, right? Where are some of the issues? And also make sure the right resources and the right decision makers who are involved throughout the process, so that the whole process can quickly be completed, right? If you don't have the right parties or the right leadership involved, then it becomes very difficult to get any kind of approvals or to get any things done. Definitely fraud is one of the key topics, right, around expense management. So make sure any solution or any processes we are implementing, that it is helping you reduce any kind of fraud exposure around employee misuse or any kind of data leaks, any kind of fraudulent transactions, right? And if those happens, make sure there are enough safety controls built in, so that you can quickly remediate those issues, right, with regards to blocking of the cards instantly, or disputing of the transaction as soon as you know there is like a fraud or an employee misuse. Then lastly, controlling spending by budget. So again, I feel this goes without saying, right? Make sure there's proper planning involved. and throughout this process, there's proper budget allocated so that there are no downstream issues. Like what we often see is that at the beginning of the year, there are no issues because there's enough budget, right? So all the invoices get approved, like there's no issue. But towards the end of the year, with the year end, that's when you start seeing questions from your accounting and for your finance department saying, how are we going to pay this? We don't have enough budget available now. So, then efficiency, again, all the automated processes we talked about, right? With manual processes, there are so many steps involved, like there needs to be so many follow-ups, there could be so many issues. But if there are automated processes, then there are audits built in, there are controls built in, and everything is more quicker and more instant, right? Visibility of the cash flow. So this goes without, like again, with all the reporting, all the real-time reporting available, all the dashboards, it helps with having like good visibility around cash flow. Then next one, the visibility to recipient. To me, like when I think about recipients, I'm thinking about like a CF or a senior leadership, right? Making sure they have visibility into how your organization is performing or managing expenses, because ultimately those are the decision makers, right? So having some kind of a dashboard where they can see like a high level overview of what the total spend of the organization is, how many cards are issued, right? Where are you spending most amount of money? Like, is that with a specific merchant? And if it is with a specific merchant, how can we make sure we get the right pricing or the right discount, right, in order to continue having the business with the same merchant or supplier? And then able to scale gracefully. So as the organization grows, we want to make sure, right, any kind of tools or processes we have are able to help you scale, right, with regards to having making sure cardholders are easily onboarded, making sure you're easily able to issue cards to your cardholder, make sure there's not enough training required, right, in order for someone to use the tools which you are leveraging. So make sure you take into account like all these things as you're thinking about like the right solutions. I don't know, Danny, do you want to take the next two? Or
Sure. So yeah, and then on evaluation, so Craig talked through this, but really some things we advise you to think through, or implementation support. How automated truly will the solution make your processes? How comprehensive is the solution, right? We really advise a more comprehensive spend management approach across the decentralized and in the more centralized AP, which we offer. So that's a really critical part. So you're not managing multiple solutions. And then pricing and rebate. So as I mentioned before, I think it's good to really try to optimize rebate and, again, think about how you can turn your department into a more of a profit center. And then finally, being more future proof. So hey, where do we go from here? So we talked about, hey, over half of you are already using some kind of solution here. So that's good, but how do you think ahead for where things are going? So really to be, have the right, relationships, the right security and controls, be set up from a cost structure perspective, and set up processes that are scalable are all really critical. And then also it's finding the right partner solutions that are going to be ahead of the curve innovation wise, right? Thinking about where the market's going to, incorporating new features and new capabilities, and then just being really positioned to grow and evolve as things change, as we know they will. So that's kind of our advice for where to go from here, and really appreciated the chance to share our thoughts with you all today.
Thanks, Danny and Rakesh. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'll turn it back over to Brian. We got a couple more key things he wants to mention as we finish up.
Thank you, Danny, Rakesh, and Craig, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. The CTP credits, today's webinar slides, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within 5 business days. And for more on optimizing accounts payable processes, be sure to register for our upcoming webinar with Corpay on September 26th, titled Unlocking the Power of Automation in AP Processes, by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us.